Well, let's go ahead and get started. Mr. Barrett Hobbs, thank you for being with us today. This program, the way we do this is, or the way we've been doing it, is we bring in people who have knowledge about what's going on in a particular area, particularly during this pandemic. And when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, trying to figure out, we haven't really talked to a business owner, particularly down on Broadway. We have talked to Butch Bearden. We've talked to a number of different people, the health folks as well. But we thought it would be really interesting to get your perspective on kind of what's going on from a business standpoint, and just want you to kind of tell us how it goes. So before we start, I usually give the numbers, and I always try to remind people to make sure that their mics are off and their videos are off, so we can proceed forward. And you'll see, Barrett, as we go through, people will be sending chat messages in. Okay. I ask all the questions. I just look at them and try to get them all in at some point during the conversation. So the latest numbers I have from the state, this would have been as of yesterday, we had 59,546 confirmed cases in Tennessee. That was up 1,955. The state set a single high this past week. They had over 2,400 new cases a couple of days ago. 13 more deaths. In Nashville, if I've got these numbers right, we had an increase of 517 new cases as of today. Yesterday we had 362 new cases. That would mean our cases are over, confirmed cases are somewhere in the neighborhood of about 14,300, 137 deaths. So our numbers are still pretty high. But I think the last time I checked in terms of hospitalizations, I think people felt okay about where we were in terms of that. So anyway, that's what's going on in Nashville and in the state in terms of our number. So let's get started. So Mr. Barrett Hobbs, welcome. And so usually what I do is I ask an easy question at first, and the rest of them get really easier. But tell me a little bit about yourself. Why am I talking to you right now, and why are you at the beach? So there you go.
Yeah, your list must be dwindling if you've got me. But one, I think this is a fantastic platform for citizens in Nashville to be able to talk with you, ask questions. So I think this is really a great thing that you're doing. I think, especially during this time, the more communication that the city can have with our elected officials, and not just the health department, I think is something that's missing at this point. So I appreciate you taking the opportunity to allow me to talk today.
Sure. So where are you from? Are you from Nashville? And yeah.
One of the minority folks at this point, as far as who's been, spent their whole life in Nashville. My son will be a 5th generation Nashvillian. So we've been here a long time. I was born in the Donaldson area, and went to Holy Rosary School, and then to Father Ryan High School, and then on to Belmont, and then into the tough world of small business USA. And kind of primarily stayed in the tourism and hospitality segment my entire life. It's really all I know.
All right. So tell me a little bit about your, so you have interest in different places, particularly down out in Donaldson and on Broadway as well, right?
Correct. We've got several properties in the Opryland area. In the bar and restaurant segment, we've got the Nashville Palace that my grandfather started in 1977. I acquired it about 3 years ago. The Scoreboard Bar and Grill, which we opened in 1996 in the shadows of the Opryland theme park back then. And then our family's business is John A's, which is a restaurant named after my grandfather that we've recently remodeled and have kind of rebranded. In the downtown segment, I've had some opportunities in the Germantown area in the past, but currently we've got 3, 2 on Broadway and 1 to the side at 2nd Avenue, which is Doc Holliday's. On Broadway, we've got Bootleggers Inn and Whiskey Bent Saloon.
Okay.
So 6 across Davidson County in the hospitality sector.
So tell me, and tell the people who are watching, from your perspective, what is going on down on, let's focus on downtown for right now, because that's where we always seem to be focused in terms of particularly the tourists. And I know tourists come out to Opryland and the hotel in Music City Drive. So I know they come out that way as well. But focus in a little bit on the downtown area. And from a small business perspective, what do you see? So, I mean, this is a chance for people to kind of learn what you see as a small business of what's happening.
Well, when it first happened back in March, no one really knew what was going to happen. We weren't sure what the virus was. We weren't sure how serious it was. At the beginning, it seemed like if you got it, you had a pretty good chance of dying. And so everyone in our industry, and I think across the board, wanted to give the federal government, the state, and the city 3-4 weeks to figure it out. I really didn't hear any panic or angst or anger or confusion or anything, just because it was so new to everyone. And I think for the most part, everybody was fine hitting the pause button or completely shutting your business down for 2 weeks to 4 weeks until we kind of figured it out. And at the beginning, it was okay. You didn't like it. As the 2 weeks turned to 3 to 4, it seemed like there wasn't a sustainable plan being talked about, that at some point our businesses would have to reopen. When would they be reopening? And in what capacity could we reopen our businesses? And that's when the hand-wringing really had began with the small businesses. The city, they didn't have a playbook to know how to do this, so they were drinking from a fire hose for sure. And that's probably been the biggest challenge. Is the city has set a health department schedule, sometimes in 7 days, sometimes in 14 days. They have their plan, and they kind of know what their numbers are. But by the time it goes through all the formulas and all the research and the back and forth, by the time it gets to the street level, to us business folks, sometimes we only have 3 or 4 days to react, either to open a business up or to close a business or to shift. And even if you're a small business with, say 5 or 10 folks employed, to change a business is kind of like stopping or turning a barge. You can't just cut on a dime and say, well, we're not going to open and it's okay, everybody go home. You've got thousands of dollars of food and products that you've either got to A, freeze, B, throw away, C, donate, or take it home and cook it, with your neighbors. So that's been probably the most difficult thing out of every small business person that I've talked to, is we don't run businesses on 14 days. We don't run them on 7. And then, throughout this, it's been a lot. I kind of draw the analogy of a boxing match. We really hadn't had a haymaker landed on us. It's been body blow after body blow after body blow, and slowly, your determination, your attitude, all of that has kind of been chipped away at. And normally small business entrepreneurs are hoist the flag and move forward. They're the toughest, most optimistic people in America. And unfortunately, you're seeing that wane at this point, and especially the Thursday leading up to the 4th of July, that was a haymaker. That was more devastating to small business operators on the Broadway area, in the Broadway area, but countywide. They didn't make a rule just for Broadway. Maybe they should have, but they didn't. They said, we're closing everyone with a certain type of license across the county. And many people across the county feel like they're being penalized because of a couple of units on Broadway that may or may not have been following the rules correct.
Okay, so I'm going to take a step back, and then I'll go to that ruling right before the 4th of July. So in terms of what you were talking about in terms of trying to figure out, you operate on you don't operate on a 3-day or a 1-day thing. You've got to keep an eye on it further out. How have you all been in fairly constant communications with the Department of Health, the mayor's office, anybody else who's involved in this, so that you have some idea, so there's good communication going back and forth, or has it been more spotty in terms of just making sure everybody kind of knows what everybody's doing?
Personally, I've been in communication with Mayor Cooper's office probably maybe a week after the original shutdown. The mayor's been very good about reaching out to me directly. One, because we personally know each other. Two, I shoot straight, and he knows I'm not going to sugarcoat it. When he needs to really know something at the street level, I'm a pretty good source. And then additionally, I'm a part of a lot of associations. So if he can hit me with something, I can let 1,000 people know with the click of a button. So I think sometimes having that conduit, and perhaps because I'm not very filtered, it drives the message home pretty quickly. But outside of that, the health department chose several people on a committee that I think are very smart. I think they're very successful. There's nothing wrong with the folks that they selected, but none of them really operated live music hospitality businesses in Nashville. I've recently referenced Bill Frist, fantastic guy, super successful, off the charts smart with, medical stuff, but he doesn't know anything about our businesses. And, you can be really smart and really successful in one field and think what would be good for that industry, but if you're not in it, you don't know. And I think that is where the problem has really originated from, was the initial few weeks they were not engaged with us. Now, I will say that Mr. Sharp and Mr. Atkins, in the last 7 to 10 days, our level of, really since the Thursday closure, right before that, Tom reached out, and I reached out to him several times, and I was like, look, you can't do this to us. We just literally pulled our employees off of unemployment. Our registers have been ringing for a couple of weeks now. We're slowly climbing back. Everybody's restocked their inventory levels. Don't yank the carpet out from under us. If you've got to take us down to a 25% capacity, take us down. So there's been a lot of back and forth with conversations similar to that. Sometimes we get some help, and there's cases like that Thursday that Tom didn't individually decide to close us, but we got closed ultimately anyways. One of the areas that I feel like that you're in charge of is the council. I feel like that the city really needs to look at a situation like this. At some point, gotta hope I'm not alive still, but Nashville will be faced with probably something like this again in its future. And I think this is a great opportunity for the city, specifically the council body, to look at the powers of the health department, other departments that have the ability to close businesses in Nashville. And I think the inclusion of the council after 30 days really needs to be mandated, that you guys are involved, primarily to your question about communication. I've got 2 council people. I've got Jeff Syracuse in one area, and I've got Councilman O'Connell in another. And then my state rep is Darren Jernigan, that you mentioned is on here. And when you're a business operator, if you're fortunate enough to have elected officials like those guys, the communication is very direct, very quick, and very honest. And I think across the county, there's pockets of business owners that don't have that, or their council people are so new, they don't understand really what's going on. So I would hope that the city would look at ways to communicate more through the council, since there are elected officials, and then they're able to have community meetings saying, hey, you're in a hot spot. Donaldson really hasn't been impacted terribly, but if it was, then Jeff would be able to host things like you're doing now to explain to people what's going on. And I feel like it's really certainly in the top two biggest concerns I have about how this epidemic's been handled in Nashville is sometimes I know more than my council person, and that's a bad system. You know, it needs to be looked at.
No, I
understand.
Yeah.
That's a long answer to your communication, but this is a complicated and evolving thing over the last few months.
Well, let me, when you said Mr. Sharp and Mr. Atkins, both of those individuals work at the Department of Health, just so people will know who they are. So take us back right before July 4th. So obviously we went through, you know, everything was shut down, and then we got to phase 1 and then to phase 2, and there were concerns about, you know, opening up live music, and we finally got to phase 3. But you know, our numbers started going up. And we've said this before on this program, you know, when you went all the way back to March and there were pictures of just crowded establishments down on Broadway, that was one of the things I think that led to the immediate, you know, the initial discussions about shutting things down. Then we finally got to the point where we started opening things back up, and then pictures resurfaced about people being crowded into bars. How, from your perspective, what happened? Were there, and there can be lots of blame and lots of things, you know, sorted out to lots of different groups. But what happened? How did the whole system kind of, you know, we were trying to make sure people wore masks and practice social distancing, and we wanted to protect the employees down there. What happened?
I think several things. And I think when you focus on Broadway and folks that are listening or that'll see this later, one thing that everyone in Nashville may not fully realize, unless you're right in the trenches with the budget and things like you are, is Broadway, whether that people like it or not, it's our economic engine. The amount of taxes that are generated off of that street are enormous. And the reason I bring that up now is it's part of the answer to what you just asked. It takes a lot to operate those businesses. And the minute that you have the opportunity to start making revenue to fill holes that are huge, economically speaking, from March to when we got to open. And we've never done this before, you know, as the health department's never written a plan like this. You know, some of our businesses have 4 and 5 entrances, you know, some have 1, some have 2. So there wasn't a game plan. And one of my early on suggestions was, instead of the health department saying, we're going to make a blanket statement and everyone's going to operate with these set of rules. Well, those rules don't work for everyone. So what my suggestion was to let the operators write their plan of action and say, here's what we're going to do at the Wild Horse. Here's what we're going to do at Tootsie's. Here's what we're going to do at Whiskey Bet Saloon. Because they're all different sizes. They've got different floors. They've got different entrances. And I think that's a lot of what happened is crowds came back slowly over the first few weeks. And then it was kind of like a light switch turned on. And, you know, it's difficult when you've got a tourist wanting to get into your establishment and it's hot outside and they're standing on the sidewalk and they're like, look, we drove from Kansas City. You know, we just want to come in and get a beer and a t-shirt and hear some music. You know, after you make them stand out on the sidewalk for 45 minutes or an hour because of the capacity rules, I think some things got loose. I think if you took, I don't think Broadway in any way has more bad operators, if that's what people want to call them, than anywhere else in the city. I think when you go to a Walmart, maybe on Old Hickory Boulevard versus the Walmart in another section of town, they're not going to be ran identically. You know, there's better managers at certain Walmarts than at others. And there's better managers on Broadway than others. But I went into restaurants across the county that were just as lax as what was going on Broadway. We just don't, those areas don't have the microscope. It's a lot easier for Channel 2 or Channel 5 or any of them, I'm picking on Channel 2, to just grab their cameras and go down and send an intern, you know, or a new reporter down there with a camera guy and say, look what all's going on at whatever bar. And I also think that some of the snapshots and some of the videos are taking somewhat out of context. It's hard to say this business has had, you know, 1,000 people go through it over a 4-hour period of time. Here's one snapshot, you know. Did that video show the operators perhaps realizing, hey, we've got too many people in here, and make adjustments? So has everyone done everything they're supposed to do down there? No. Have they done it countywide? No. You know, have we somewhat been singled out as the bad group of people? I think that's fair to say. You know, when you go into a Home Depot or a big box retail and you walk through as an operator on Broadway and you don't see any hand sanitizer, you know, nobody standing 6 feet apart. You know, you begin to kind of wonder, why are they just targeting, you know, our businesses with our crowds? And, you know, the alcohol plays into it. You know, there's no doubt that we run a unique business model down there. So I think that's what happened. I don't think it was one operator, 2 or 3 that just said, you know, the city, to hell with their rules. We don't want to listen to them. I don't think anyone made that decision. I just think as this has evolved, we're having to learn. You know, and then, you know, I don't think the city meant to do this. But by closing the businesses leading up to 4th of July, it actually caused bigger crowds on the sidewalks because there was only 4 businesses open. So all the tourists and the locals that go down into the entertainment district, if you've got 10,000 people there, you've only got 4 businesses that can open. What are they going to do? Pack up and go back to Kansas City? They're not going to do that. They're going to stand around and they're going to wait in line. So by limiting their options, it actually kind of worked backwards from what they were hoping. And I think they realize that now, and we're working together to get our properties open back up.
Okay. So a lot of good statements, a lot of good questions that stem from all that. So, okay, so let's just talk about July 4th. So you all found out what
Thursday.
I think it was Thursday that you all were going to be shut down. Everything was going to be, the bar's going to be shut down on the 2nd for the 4th of July weekend, and for a couple of weeks after that. How do you deal with that? I mean, obviously, that we had tourists in town. You had employees that were thinking they were going to be working, and then all of a sudden they weren't. What happens in a situation like that? And how did you know it was coming? Did you have I mean, you find out Thursday, 2 days before the 4th of July. How does the small business deal with something like that?
It was devastating. It was an absolute gut punch. We had conversations with the health department starting on Sunday that the numbers were trending in the wrong direction. You know, and I've got to give all the credit in the world to Tom Sharp on that. He asked me, you know, he reached out to me, 6, 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. The guy's working to figure this out. And I think that says a lot about his dedication. He texts us, man, our numbers are looking terrible. We may have to make some adjustments. We don't want to roll back. And that was kind of the beginning of the conversation. And then Monday, numbers looked kind of bad still. Tuesday looked a little worse. And so we started to get the sense there was going to be some adjustments. We didn't think they were going to take live music back from us. Sure didn't think they were going to close us. But maybe a capacity, a drastic cut in what we could have in the building, which I think would have been the smart thing to do. And I think if the city had to do it over again, that's probably what they would do for the weekend at least, and then reassess it on Monday. So Thursday morning, we found out, well, with everyone else at the press conference, that's what had happened, or that's what the plan was. And we had about 18 hours to close our businesses. Just to give you and other folks a glimpse into how strong Broadway and that area is and sense of our economy is with that decision, about 5,800 employees lost their jobs, you know, and so many times in our city and other cities, you see the Chamber of Commerce, you know, on the front page of the paper or on the television touting a, a new business coming to downtown or wherever, and they've got 150 employees or 1,000 employees, and it's like the second coming. But there's been silence in the media about 5,500 or so employees gone. Just in the Broadway area, from talking to our food purveyors, you know, the early estimates are somewhere between $550,000 and $800,000 worth of food got thrown away. You know, and that's just in that section. That's not my friends in Old Hickory. There's several places in Representative Jernigan's district that got closed also, that had 4th of July plans. And, you know, you don't, restaurants and bars operate off of coolers, not jumbo freezers. So I've heard some people say, well, they can just freeze it. They don't know anything about our industry. There's about an 80-20 blend in the restaurant world. Got about 80% coolers and about 20% freezers. You buy your products with a 4 to 5 day lead time, you know, so everybody had brought in their beer, their alcohol. It's a lot, you know, and your food. A lot of folks don't realize that in the state of Tennessee, you have to pay for your liquor when you get it. We don't get terms. It's not like buying a car, you know, where you get it's spread out over a period of time. So to give you an idea economically, in a normal year with the 4th of July on a Saturday, the entertainment district would generate about $180 million over the weekend. With coronavirus, the estimates were somewhere between 70 and 80 million. Ultimately, with the closure of the bars and the hospitality businesses, we probably generated $2 million. So the schools and the police and the fire and everything, public works, everybody's sidewalks, everyone's greenways that everyone loves. We went from generating $180 million to $2 million. And there's just not another industry or another section in town that can fill that vacuum, you know, and it's going to catch up to us. We can't keep opening businesses and closing businesses. It doesn't work.
So tell me, obviously, after you all got opened back up, you know, after we got out of when we started phase 2 and phase 3, and I'll go back to something you said, you know, fortunately, unfortunately, the areas downtown and particularly Broadway are under a microscope. You know, when you think of the tourists and you think of people coming, that's when you think of, you know, the city, you look at a couple different places, but mainly there's a lot of focus on Broadway. And you're right. I mean, the reporters, that's where they go. You see them broadcasting from down there. So with the understanding that that area is under a microscope and that, you know, there's going to be people coming in, taking pictures, there's going to be camera crews down there, all that other stuff. How as a business owner, how do other business owners, you sort of know going into this, well, just getting out of phase 1 and heading into phase 2 and 3, that people are going to be watching. Okay. I mean, you knew that. You knew it. Everybody else knows it. We know it. How do you make sure that business owners actually comply? Because when they don't comply, when pictures get out where you've got, you know, hundreds of people all crowded in, not wearing masks, that's going to get out, and that's going to make, you know, that's going to raise alarms and flags.
Right. It's a good question. My answer to that is, we know we're under a microscope. We're, again, one of the things I think that was missing with the plan was an upfront, clear communication of the penalties. I don't think that the health department or the city really anticipated the numbers jumping like they did. And some of the pictures and the violations and things were also before the city had mandated masks other than for employees. So some of the pictures, it's a little unfair that are being used against some of the bars down there. So, oh, look, nobody has mask on. Well, they hadn't been asked to put on the public, to be honest. Whether they should have or not, it doesn't really matter. Generally speaking, people didn't want to wear masks at that point. It hadn't been mandated. So, going back to the media, they could have gone into, Bill Miller's place at Nudies, one of the honky tonks on the street. It was done perfectly. The Sandersons that have been down there almost as long as anyone, their businesses were set up properly. My businesses were set up properly. However, I have received a violation at one of my downtown properties that I think this is a good example. I've received it in the mail that one of my employees on an unspecified day at an unspecified time wasn't wearing their mask. And I received a citation for it. It's kind of like, well, maybe they should have picked the phone up and called the operator and said, hey, you've got an employee without a mask on. Why? Does she have asthma? Did she just clock in? Had she just clocked out? And kind of work with us on that kind of stuff. And I think that's where we're going now. But prior to where we are now, there really wasn't clear. And I think that's where the city needs to go. I think they need to open it all back up. Everyone needs to operate at a reduced capacity. And then if you have an operator that is not operating properly, there ought to be a clear penalty. You're going to get a warning. The second time you're getting $1,000 fine and you've got to close for 2 days, something like that. I mean, there's a reason that there's a penalty for breaking the speed limit. To think that our operators on Broadway are any different than any other business, that's why there's regulations. And I think that's the right approach. You're never going to have everybody do it perfectly. So don't set a system up assuming that. So I think that's where we need to go with it. But I think also unfair to just focus on the one or two that had a bad night or two and weren't doing what they were supposed to do, and then say, well, we're going to close down places in Belmead over that, or Bellevue or Hermitage. It's kind of like you want to cut a finger off and end up lopping the whole arm off. And economically, it's going to affect the city if they keep doing it.
So where do we go? I'm going to, at some point, I'll ask you some broader questions about how we fix all this stuff. But based upon, that's a tremendous amount of revenue lost over the 4th of July weekend. I understand that. And obviously, everybody's having to weigh, okay, revenue, safety, how do we do all this stuff? But since the 4th of July, since that closure, are there new things that have been put in place? You're talking about, okay, how do we improve on this? How do we make sure? I understand the idea of you getting a letter or citation that comes in and says, hey, somebody was not wearing a mask at a certain time. I understand that somebody maybe should have picked up the phone and said, wait a minute, somebody's not wearing a mask right now. They need to put that mask back on.
Right.
Are there new things in place? Obviously we're learning about this thing. We're learning about COVID-19. We've been with it for 4 or 5, 6 months, trying to figure out what to do with it. It's all new. But are there new things that are being put into place right now between Downtown Merchants and the health department and the mayor's office to make sure that ideas are being floated back and forth, because it is important to get these businesses open back up?
Specifically, we've started on that. Butch Spiriton, the health department, and the mayor's office, and myself all started working really the Monday after 4th of July, saying this just won't work. We've got 400 musicians out of work, the 5,000 something employees. What are we going to do? And the health department says, well, we might let you open back up in 14 days. Mike doesn't get it. So we thought what we're doing is not working. And so we got together on the phone and said, okay, the hospitality industry is going to collapse. And we were seeing quick indicators for the fall and the winter, and then into 2021, that conventions and groups were now starting to cancel that far out because of us rolling back to phase 2. So we said, what do we need to do? So Butch hosted a meeting. My days kind of run together. It was either yesterday or the day before. And we had some of the best operators in town. We had hoteliers. We had catering companies, restaurants, bars, maybe 10, 11 of us that fit a certain segment. And it's been my opinion, and I think they've taken my opinion and are really crafting something now, that we're not all the same. What works at the Palm doesn't work at Scoreboard, and what works at Scoreboard doesn't work at Kid Rocks. So what we're going to have to do is look at capacities and types of businesses and really customize rules and regulations for those type of businesses, and then use the capacity, which is the concern of everyone, is density of human beings inside those businesses. We'll lay out a new guideline, a new set of guidelines that a business owner, let's take an event person. A lot of folks aren't talking about them, but think about all the parties that you go to throughout the year, not this year, but last year, let's say, weddings, company things, Christmas parties, anniversaries, any of that kind of stuff. All of these event rooms have been sitting empty since March. They're small businesses, generally speaking. And I'm not even talking about ballrooms like at the Omni or Opryland Hotel. I'm talking about small business operators that are our neighbors. They can't book a wedding in October right now. Or if they have one that's booked in October, the bride is now wanting to come to Nashville and kill all of us if she doesn't, come after sooner and say, hey, how many guests can I have? Can I have 50? Can I have 100? Can I have 200? Can we have a dance? Can I have my first dance? After you're married, can I dance with my dad? These are things that are happening to people that they'll never get to do again. Although I guess you could argue a lot of people get to get married more than once these days, but the first time for a bride to be able to do that is a special thing. And so that's where we're looking now. We're looking at, okay, if we can take a neighborhood pub that has 50 people, do they need the same restrictions and requirements as a bar on Broadway that can hold 1,000? And anyone with any common sense can see that you don't need that. So that's what we're doing now. So we kind of had a general discussion with the city about the economic devastation that we're experiencing, and that we need to move quickly. And the city's not set up, the government's not set up to move as fast as small business operators. We move quickly. And they understood that. And so Monday we began breaking out into mini groups, many and not lots, and in small groups, to say, okay, this group is going to concentrate on restaurants. This group's going to concentrate on bars. And the health department's going to be involved in that. And my guess and my hope is that having these smart people in the room working with the health department, we can quickly come up with a balance. And that's kind of the key word. You used it, and everyone is. We may have super bars that can only operate with a couple hundred people in there for the next month, 2 months, maybe it's 6 months. And but at least they'll know this is what I can do. And they can build a plan around that. They can either hire or fire employees to meet that demand and move forward. Jerking the employees around off of unemployment is something that just can't be done any longer. That's going to permeate through the whole economy of Nashville. They're not going to buy cars. They're not going to buy dresses. They're not going to buy Yeti coolers at the store, whatever it is. So my hope is that next week we make some big strides.
All right. So let me throw out a couple of different things. I like the idea that people are breaking into smaller groups, and sounds like starting this week, you're all going to be working through that, which I think is a really good idea. There's a couple of suggestions that have come through. I'm going to throw out a couple of ideas.
Okay.
And then just talk to me about why they either are good or bad, or whether people have considered them. all right. So the first one is, and I had thrown this out a long time ago, and other people have as well. It was like during this pandemic, when you want people to have space, you want people social distancing and away from each other. The idea was, at least temporarily, why don't you close down traffic on Broadway between 1st and 5th or whatever, and just open up the space so that people can move around and you don't have crowded sidewalks. So good idea, bad idea?
It's both. It's a good idea from a medical standpoint. It's a bad idea in application, and I'll give you some specifics, concerns. If we had the ability to regulate the street where you wouldn't have, right now, the world we're living in, you know, either peaceful protesters or non-peaceful protesters in the middle of the street, we don't have the ability to control that and keep it a pleasant business environment. Two, you've got folks that are camped out on the Capitol right now with tents and stuff. So that's a fear that, you know, and it's no secret to you or anyone else that goes through downtown. We have got an almost out of control situation with folks that either mentally don't know how to get out of the homeless trap, or they've made the decision that that's the life that they want to lead, is to live on our streets and panhandle and do things like that. So that's the big concern. You know, just to be perfectly honest, when the operators talk about that, if you could eliminate all those concerns, and I think that's fantasy land to think that we could, then expanding the sidewalk into the street makes a lot of sense. There's some compromise being kicked around to say maybe we don't close it completely down. Maybe we take the fire lane and maybe the first lane to give the space on the sidewalk a little more. We've kind of got a bad taste in our mouths on Broadway from the pilot program that was initiated probably 4 years ago. I think it was under Mayor Berry's time. It might have been at the end of Mayor Dean, where they took the bicycle racks and they put them out to expand the sidewalks. And we were supposed to get new sidewalks, and those were only going to last from May to November. And they're still there and they look terrible. So anything that's a pilot program with Broadway, there's a fear that you're messing with almost a perfect economic engine, you know, and it doesn't take much to throw it off. You can also go to Beale Street, places in Austin, Louisville, anywhere that they've done that. It's brought in, you know, troublemakers, folks that know there's folks that are drinking, there's pretty ladies and pretty men, and they're targets. And it's not been very successful when you close off an entertainment district. I don't want to speak for all of the merchants on this, but the vast majority want to see cars in some capacity, unless it's CMA Fest or the Predators or some kind of big city event, and then we're totally fine with it. You know, I'll quote Rubel Sanderson one time when it was brought up. He said, you know, if you put the party in the street, you're not going to have a party in your building anymore, or something like that. And I think he's wise in that. So I don't want to say no, but yeah, it's we got to find a balance, you know.
Yeah, I understand the last part, because obviously if you have people come in and buy beer and then they go out into the street and listen to music or something, they're not staying in an establishment. But at this point, I would agree. Everything is sort of on the table as we're trying to work our way through this.
Yeah, you just can't say no, but we've really, really, really got to watch that.
All right, so let me ask you this. Here's another suggestion. Are there folks down there in the downtown area, either sponsored by the owners, the bar owners, the small business owners, or the Downtown Merchants Association, or whatever, that are actually down there promoting people wearing masks, and, you know, actually in a very friendly way? I mean, you know, we have an ordinance, well, we have an executive order that says mandatory to wear a mask out in public spaces.
Right.
But you know, one of the things about the Good to Go, which was something that the I think Butch Bearden and the convention visitors folks came up with, was training for small businesses about how to handle it, where to mask, socially distancing that was for employees, it was for business owners. Great thing. But I don't think the visitors that were coming in are necessarily going to watch a webinar about how to be safe. So, and they don't necessarily know that there's an executive order out there saying they have to wear masks. So are there people out there, are there signs out there, are there people out there saying, hey, we're glad you're here, but you need to put on a mask and you need to stay safe? And was that going on before the 4th? I know things are a little different right now, but.
Right. Yes and no. I hate to say it that way. There are some signage, some signage that has been done inside different properties. Many of the operators have gone and bought, and again, I brought Bill Miller's name up earlier, and I'll bring it up again. He won in particularly very early on. They were aggressive with purchasing tens of thousands of masks and giving them away, to anyone coming in, anyone leaving. One of the ideas was to get Butch to spearhead, a Music City mask. And we've suggested the city needs to work with Tom Turner's group, and a lot of folks may not know who Tom is. He's the director of the Downtown Partnership. Right. So folks go downtown and see the folks on the segways and watering the plants and pressure washing the sidewalks. That's Tom's group. Fantastically ran quasi-government agency, with the Downtown Partnership. I think we've got to advance that. Just to be perfectly honest, I think the mask executive order came out and there wasn't a plan in place to let folks know. So I think we need to step up as a city and put public hand sanitizing spots in our high density areas. I think there needs to be some uniform, fun looking masks, that are better than just the throwaways. Not everybody, those things are pretty uncomfortable. So I think we've got a long ways to go in reaching that goal. But I will say this, that every single operator that's part of our merchants group in the downtown corridor is gone way above and beyond some of the suggestions, from the Good to Go or just the general CDC. We've got operators that have installed UV lights around their heating and air conditioning units, which is something that I think more and more businesses will start doing in advertising, because as the air gets circulated through the building, it's the same air. It just goes through a traditional filter that isn't going to catch, microscopic germs. That's not what filter's designed to do. So I think there's a lot of that is going on that folks, one of the biggest deterrents for businesses not to do the wrong thing is liability issues with your employees. We want our employees to be safe. We certainly want our guests to be safe, but it's going to be difficult for a guest to go back and say, you know what, I caught coronavirus in Nashville. I didn't catch it on the airplane. I didn't catch it in the cab. I caught it at Bootleggers. That doesn't exist with your employees. So, the operators are trying very hard in an unprecedented time.
So I was looking, there was somebody had sent in an idea about making sure that employees are all tested. And so the idea was to have, I think, based upon just what I read, it was some type of testing site for all the employees that work down on Broadway. So they would go get tested, have their temperature taken, whatever. And then, they'd get an armband that said, yep, I'm good to go for a couple of days, and then go to work. I don't know if you could do that. You could certainly, I'm just throwing all this stuff out. I mean, you could certainly do that with employees, or you could do it I guess you could temperature check tourists. Because if one of the concerns is, now you'd have to limit access in, which might slow things down as well. But if one of the concerns is about making sure our employees are safe, the employees that work for you, then there's got to be some better way of making sure that people do adhere to social protocols or social health protocols. Has there been any idea? I mean, so I know like closing it down or having some other access point to employees so that we know everybody is getting checked as they come in. Have you heard
Yeah.
that one? That one, yeah.
Every idea you can imagine has been floated out. There's been the idea of funneling everyone through temperature checks before they get onto Broadway, but the logistics of that and the thousands of people, it just became, not realistic. That was one of the topics that was brought up. I've got an employee specifically, we know now she tested negative, but she worked with a group of 4 other employees. She was exposed, her boyfriend had it, exposed at home, came to work. We take all of our employees' temperatures and log it. And then we asked them, do you think you've been around anybody? And that question at the beginning was kind of monotonous and it really didn't mean much. Nobody was around anyone, really. But now there's a bunch, a bunch of exposures. So when we asked the question, she said, yeah, my boyfriend's being tested now. And we're like, okay, well, you got to go home. And we immediately called the other 4 folks that worked with her and said, hey, she's going to go get tested. It took 9 days, to get her test back. Thankfully, she was negative, and the other 4 employees were negative as well. All of them took between 5 and 12 days to get the test back. So one of the things that got brought up in Butch's meeting the other day was for us to come up with some type of hospitality certificate and find a lab or Vanderbilt or Meharry or someone that could fast track the hospitality industry. And we would pay for it ourselves. The business operators or the city maybe could use some funds from the Coronavirus Cares Fund to reimburse businesses as we test our employees. I think the wearing of masks, public hand sanitizing, reducing of capacities in businesses, and fast test and fast accurate results. It's really important. There's a story on ESPN today, with a race car driver that missed last week's race, because he tested positive. Then the next day he tested negative. And then the next test, I think, was positive again, and they found out that they think the test was faulty, and it's like, golly, we can't have that. So we need it to be accurate and we need it to be fast. And that way we can have our folks back at work, in an environment that, it's impossible to completely sterilize the relationship between a hospitality worker and a customer. We're never going to get there. It's not going to happen. So I think all of those parts, I think we're in a spot now, I was talking to Butch about this, that there's not a magic wand. There's not one thing we can do that's going to drastically move the needle. I spoke to Ben Eagles at the mayor's office the other day. And I said, Ben, you're closing us for 14 days. Let's say you close us for 114. Is the virus going to be gone in 114 days? Of course, the answer is no. Are we going to have a vaccine in 114 days? No. Will our economy completely be destroyed if we keep our businesses closed for 114 days? Yes. Again, you go back to the balance. And to Butch and mine's conversation, it's going to take 5, 7, 8 things that are going to have a 10% impact, each of them. And when you combine them all, you're going to knock the bottom out of it a little bit. But I think it's unrealistic now not to expect 300 to 400 infections a day for a while. I just think that's the world we're going to live in. And, you've got to be smart. If you're older, you've got, something wrong with you, I think you've really got to be cautious about what you do. And then the rest of us have got to do the best we can. And I hate to say it, somewhat just roll the dice. You pointed out early on that the hospitalization numbers are, for the most part, staying, where we need them to stay. And we don't certainly want to overwhelm the hospitals. But, they've also, maybe the city needs to look at the hospitals and the elective surgery. Part of the reason there's only so many hospital beds for coronavirus is they now are doing full-blown elective surgeries. Maybe like limiting our businesses, to being closed or to 50% occupancy. Maybe they need to tell the hospitals, look, you can only do 30% elective surgeries or 50%, And that's a growing sense of concern in our industry, as we seem to be the most heavily regulated industry in the city. You know, they're not telling Walmart, now I'm not picking on Walmart, you know, a great American company, but, you know, the city hasn't gone to them and said, you know what, maybe we don't need to sell kegerators right now, you know, or foosball tables. You know, maybe we need Walmart to sell clothing items and food and essentials and reduce their numbers down of density in their stores. You know, I think we're going to have to do a lot more than just hone in on some bars on Broadway to beat this thing.
Well, let me, first of all, we've got like a minute or two left, and I really appreciate you coming on the Zoom call and just being honest and talking through this with us. I think it's really, to me, it's fascinating because we're having to look at it from so many different angles. And I think you've given a very clear perspective of what it's like to be a small business owner. So in the last minute or so that we've got, you said during the program, it's like particularly small business owners, you know, they're the most optimistic. They're the ones who said, we're going to get there. So last minute, what do you think? You know, we're not sure what's going to happen, how long this is going to stay with us. We're still waiting for that vaccine to be developed. Optimistic?
I'm always optimistic. You know, we live in the greatest country in the world, greatest country in the history of mankind. And we're very, very fortunate to live in one of the best cities in that country. And if you're going to pick a place to have a small business, Nashville is going to be in the top 2 or 3. You know, I think optimistically looking at this, we've got to have a consistent plan for businesses to plan into 60 days, 90 days, 120 days into February. And if the city and the health department will give us that, I think everyone will be optimistic we'll get through this. But until we have a consistent plan that we can budget and build our businesses back on, pessimism is gonna sneak in on us. You know, that's one thing about Nashville is, you know, Opryland theme park closed. We retooled ourselves. We became an entertainment fun, you know, environment. Floods came, tornadoes came. We're always a cheerleading town. And I feel like from the press conferences to the media coverage, they're not talking about anything positive. And there are positive things in our city right now. And I think that's where the microscope needs to go. I think it's going to take everyone to stop just focusing on the infections and say, hey, this is a great place. We got great businesses. We're going to get through this. Let's all truly get in it together.
All right. Thank you, Barrett Hobbs. Thank you for being on this. Enjoy the rest of your time at the beach. We really do appreciate you being on.
So much.
And everybody, thanks for being on. We're on next week, on next Saturday, July 18th. With Rashad Faruqdin, who is a good friend of mine. He was head, I don't know if he's still head of the Islamic Center of Nashville, and he's going to be talking to us. Rashad is a great guy, very heavily involved in the community. So once again, please join us next week. Barrett, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. See
you all
later,
have a good weekend, a good rest of the week. Thanks, everybody.